They were sentenced to 26 years in prison before they ever cut a record. Then a broken-handed frontman taped a microphone to his fist and invented himself from scratch. Elvis Presley handed them their biggest hit. For 5 straight years, they ranked among the top 5 highest-grossing live acts on the planet. And almost nobody remembers it. This is the fire they couldn't contain. This is the rise and fall of Black Oak, Arkansas. To understand Black Oak, Arkansas, you had to understand where they came from. Not a city with a music scene, not a college town with coffee houses and open mics. Black Oak, Arkansas was a rural farming hamlet in Crayhead County with fewer than 300 people. A place where conformity wasn't just expected, it was enforced. In the mid-1960s, a group of young misfits gathered under the leadership of James Mangrum, a raw-boned, restless kid who would later go down in rock and roll history as Jim Dandy. These weren't polished musicians angling for a record deal. They were what the locals called the town freaks, boys with long hair in a county where long hair was considered a communist act. Mangrum later recalled being the first long hair in the entire region, and that identity came at a price. He got into 5 fights a week, often behind barns, just for the way he looked. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. That siege mentality bonded them into something more than a band. They became an outlaw collective. They rehearsed in a galvanized grain bin on the edge of town, blasting sounds that rattled the flat delta landscape. They called themselves the Nobody Else, and their early sound borrowed from the Beatles and the Byrds. But what they were building toward was something rawer, heavier, and entirely their own. Mangrum was originally the group's drummer. Then came the accident that changed everything. A violent brawl left him with broken fingers on both hands. He couldn't hold drumsticks, so he stepped to the microphone. He had to tape the mic to his hand just to perform. And standing there, broken and defiant, he discovered something that would define the rest of his life. That was the first night he did the splits, and he never looked back. The band's outlaw reputation became literal in 1966, when they were charged with grand larceny for stealing a public address system from their high school. The courts sentenced them in absentia to 26 years at Tucker Prison Farm. Rather than surrender, they fled to the hills of north-central Arkansas and lived off the land, refining a sound that blended gospel, country, blues, and psychedelic rock into something that had never existed before. The sentence was eventually suspended, but the mythology was already written. These were men who had literally run from the law for the right to play rock and roll. By the time they relocated, first to Memphis, then to Los Angeles, they carried that Arkansas hardness with them like a second skin. The music industry had never seen anything quite like them. The transition from the Nobody Else to Black Oak, Arkansas happened when their music reached the orbit of Atlantic and Atco in California, where Ahmet Ertegun and his team recognized something in the band that defied easy categorization. They signed the group to a record deal, and in 1971, the self-titled debut arrived. That debut introduced the world to the triple guitar attack: Ricky Lee Reynolds, Stanley Knight, and Harvey Jett, weaving 3 guitars into a wall of sound that predated the mainstream Southern rock explosion. Reynolds was direct about what they were doing. He later said there was no other group making that kind of music at the time, that they were the first to blend rock, country, and rhythm and blues with 3 guitars. Underground FM stations picked them up immediately and were spinning them, while the major markets were still catching up. Songs like Hot and Nasty and Lord Have Mercy on My Soul built a devoted following through relentless touring. But the commercial breakthrough, the moment that burned their name into the national consciousness, came in 1973 with the album High on the Hog, and a single that nobody expected. The song was Jim Dandy, a cover of Laverne Baker's 1957 rhythm and blues classic, and the story behind it was genuine rock and roll legend. Mangrum had been nicknamed Jim Dandy by his father after the original tune. He resisted covering it for years, feeling the song was too prissy for a band built on raw, grinding energy. Then Elvis Presley told him he should record it. As Mangrum later reflected, "You don't say no to the king of rock and roll." The recording produced something unforgettable. Ruby Starr, born Constance Henrietta Mierzwiak, brought a raspy powerhouse vocal to the Jim Dandy refrain that cut right through Mangrum's sandpaper growl. Her voice was the perfect counterweight to his, and together they turned a vintage R&B track into one of the most electrifying rock singles of the decade. The song climbed to number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100. Black Oak, Arkansas were no longer a regional secret. Television followed. The band appeared on the Midnight Special and Don Kirshner's rock concert, where their frantic, barely contained energy stood in jarring contrast to the polished pop acts sharing the bill. Audiences who had never heard of Black Oak, Arkansas were suddenly talking about the wildest band they had ever seen. Jim Dandy Mangrum strutted across those stages like a man who had been born in the spotlight and was only now getting his due. Between 1972 and 1975, Black Oak, Arkansas became something the music industry rarely produces, a genuine live phenomenon. For several consecutive years, they ranked among the highest-grossing live acts in the United States. This was a band that built an empire one sweaty, screaming audience at a time. Jim Dandy Mangrum was the engine of all of it. Performing bare-chested and skin-tight white spandex, his waist-length blonde hair flying, he prowled the stage like something between a rock star and a backwoods preacher. He played an old-fashioned washboard with what critics diplomatically described as unmentionable indignities. He led the crowd in deep breathing exercises to clean out their bodies. He delivered monologues that mixed populist rebellion with a quasi-mystical country philosophy that somehow made perfect sense in the context of the music. One writer described him as preening and strutting like a peacock on acid. It was an accurate description. But what made it more than spectacle was the genuine conviction behind every movement. Mangrum believed in what he was doing with the fervor of a true believer, and that belief was contagious. The 1973 live album Raunch and Roll Live captured this energy in full, documenting what critics called a lascivious, acid-fried hillbilly boogie you have to hear to believe. It was the definitive record of their peak. Then came April 6, 1974, when Black Oak, Arkansas took the stage at the California Jam in front of an audience estimated at 200,000 to 400,000 people. They shared that bill with Black Sabbath, the Eagles, and Deep Purple. They held their own in that company without flinching. Behind the platinum success and sold-out shows, the band lived a communal life in Oakland, Arkansas, pooling resources and raising families together in a compound that felt like an extension of their grain bin origins. They funded the local school. They raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Arkansas Children's Hospital. The same men who had once been sentenced to prison for stealing a PA system were now among the most famous people their home state had ever produced. The stage persona Mangrum had constructed was already sending ripples forward through time. Music historians would later document that David Lee Roth and Axl Rose both drew directly from his template: the physicality, the danger, the unfiltered sexuality, the sense that anything could happen at any moment. In the mid-70s, that template was being written in real time, and nobody was doing it better. Success at that level generates its own gravity, and by the mid-1970s, the gravity was pulling in dangerous directions. The momentum from High on the Hog stalled with the 1974 release Street Party, which failed to deliver a follow-up hit. The band was working on a punishing schedule dictated by their manager Butch Stone, who Mangrum later described as a man who believed the whole thing was a fluke that wasn't going to last. Stone pushed them relentlessly, and the relentlessness produced diminishing creative returns. There was no space to breathe, no room to grow. Just the next show, the next album, the next city. The most consequential decision of the band's career came in 1975, when Stone moved them from one record label to another for what was widely seen as a lucrative new deal. In the short term, it looked like a triumph. In the long term, Mangrum recognized it as the beginning of the end. He later said that if they had not moved, the band's legacy might have looked very different. The supportive relationship they had built with Erdogan's organization was replaced by a corporate arrangement that understood them less and cared about them less. Albums that followed, X-Rated in 1975, Balls of Fire in 1976, 10-year overnight success also in 1976, failed to reach the commercial heights of the earlier years. The music industry was shifting beneath their feet. Disco was eating into the cultural space that hard rock had occupied. Stadium rock was getting slicker, more polished, more produced. Black Oak's raw, unvarnished boogie sounded increasingly out of step with what radio programmers wanted. In a fateful attempt to reinvent themselves, the band shortened their name to simply Black Oak in 1977. The strategy was to reduce their southernness, to sand down the regional edges, and present something more palatable to a broader mainstream audience. It was a misreading of everything that had made them matter. Their core audience felt the distance immediately, and the mainstream audience they were chasing never materialized. Then, the drummer situation fractured everything. Tommy Aldridge had been one of the most powerful drummers in rock, and his dissatisfaction with the band's direction had been building for years. When he finally decided to leave, he had to sneak away in the middle of the night to Chicago to escape his management contract. The image said everything about the state of the operation. The cracks were no longer hidden. By the late 1970s, Black Oak, Arkansas was coming apart at the seams. The departure of Tommy Aldridge left a hole that couldn't be filled, and the 18 months of lawsuits surrounding his exit paralyzed the band's ability to record and tour effectively. Creative momentum, once their greatest weapon, had been replaced by legal paralysis. Harvey Jett had left in 1974. Ricky Lee Reynolds was gone by 1977. By that point, Mangrum was the only original member still standing, fronting a lineup that lacked the fraternal chemistry forged in that Arkansas grain bin. The band that had once operated as a genuine brotherhood was now a frontman with hired hands behind him. They signed with Capricorn Records, the Macon, Georgia label that had once been home to the Allman Brothers Band but was by then approaching bankruptcy, and released Race with the Devil in 1977 and I'd Rather Be Sailing in 1978. Neither record performed. The raw energy that had once felt like a revolution now felt like a nostalgia act, struggling to stay relevant. Mangrum's attempts to reshape his vocal style towards something more mainstream were met with critical indifference. The audience that had followed him for years wasn't interested in a polished version of Jim Dandy. They wanted the real thing, and the real thing was getting harder to find. The final blow came in 1984, when Mangrum suffered a heart attack. The health crisis pulled him off the road during a decade when Southern rock was already being eclipsed by hair metal and MTV-friendly pop. Ricky Lee Reynolds kept a version of the band going during the recovery. But without the iconic frontman, Black Oak, Arkansas had no identity left to sell. The machine had finally stopped. The years that followed were marked by partial returns and near misses that never quite recaptured the flame. The 1984 album, Ready as Hell, and the 1986 follow-up, The Black Attack is Back, featured a heavier metal-influenced sound, keyboards, pinch harmonics, the sonic signifiers of the decade. The albums landed on smaller labels and were largely ignored. Critics who revisited them described them as relatively lackluster compared to the first years. Even the packaging sent a signal. On the cover of Ready as Hell, Mangrum's name appeared larger than the band name itself. The brand had contracted to a single face. Mangrum suffered another setback in 1991, a bad car accident that added to the physical toll the road had extracted, but the impulse to return to the stage never left him. In 1995, original bass player Patrick Daugherty rejoined the fold, and the nostalgia market of the 1990s provided some oxygen. A 1992 compilation called Hot and Nasty helped introduce the catalog to a new generation, and a King Biscuit Flower Hour set in 1998 documented the band's live legacy for those who had missed it the first time. Then came a loss that hit the inner circle hard. Ruby Starr, whose voice had given Jim Dandy its electric counterpoint, who had toured with the band and become woven into their story, died in 1995 from cancer at the age of 45. Mangrum spoke of her passing with a mix of Southern frankness and genuine grief. She had been part of the family, part of the mythology. Her death at 45 was a reminder that the era had taken more than just careers. In 1999, the group released The Wild Bunch under the name Jim Dandy's Black Oak, Arkansas. an acknowledgement of the reality that the identity of the band had always lived primarily in one man's persona, and that persona was still standing, still carrying the flag even when everyone else had put theirs down. The final chapter of the Black Oak, Arkansas story is not one of redemption in the conventional sense. There was no triumphant reunion that restored the classic lineup to its former glory. What there was, instead, was something more durable, the slow recognition that this band had mattered more than the history books initially admitted. Mangrum's influence on the visual and performative language of hard rock proved impossible to ignore once people started looking. David Lee Roth's Diamond Dave persona, the strutting, preening, sexually charged frontman who treated the stage as his personal kingdom, drew directly from Mangrum's mid-70s blueprint. Axl Rose's vocal intensity and physical abandon owed a debt that rock historians documented with increasing clarity. These were not coincidences. They were inheritance. The man from Black Oak, Arkansas, had written a template that shaped a generation of frontmen without ever receiving the credit he deserved. The band's triple guitar attack, pioneered years before Leonard Skinner achieved mainstream recognition, influenced the structural architecture of Southern rock and early heavy metal. They were, as Reynolds had said, the first to do it, and the first rarely gets the laurels. In 2013, the band returned and released Back Thar and Over Yonder, combining new material with unreleased tracks from the 1970s glory years. The title was pure Mangrum, unapologetic, unpolished, rooted in the soil of a 300-person town that had produced something the world hadn't expected. A final album, Underdog Heroes, followed in 2019. The title fit. Then, in 2021, Ricky Lee Reynolds, co-founder, original guitarist, the man who had stood alongside Mangrum in that grain bin at the beginning of everything, passed away. His death marked the end of the band's founding partnership, a 60-year story that had begun in defiance and ended in legacy. Mangrum continued to perform. The heart attacks, the car crashes, the lawsuits, the decades of chaos, none of it had extinguished the fire. The boy who had taped a microphone to his broken hand and done the splits for the first time in a grain bin in Arkansas never stopped reaching for the electricity of a live stage. And maybe that, more than any chart position or platinum record, was the truest measure of what Black Oak, Arkansas had always been. Black Oak, Arkansas burned too hot to last and too bright to be forgotten. From a grain bin in a 300-person town to the biggest stages in the world, they proved that raw talent and pure defiance could move mountains. For a while, the chaos that made them legendary also consumed them, but the music endured. What's your memory of Black Oak, Arkansas? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's greatest era.